So I'm going to be doing a bunch of reviews on scary games, and I'm kind of doing them on older games. There's nothing spookier than spending lots of money all the time for video games to appear relevant, and also worrying about the fact that I've got, projects and stuff that are going to be due, which is going to be crazy in October. Okay, moving on. So the older game that in question is one that's been sitting on my Steam library for quite a while, and it is the Infectious Madness of Dr. Dekker. The thing that really grabbed my attention from the get-go is that Dr. Dekker is a full-motion video game. Basically, for those of you who don't know or are not watching the video, I guess, they are fully live-action filmed sections that are kind of chopped up into a video game. It's a bit of a long-lost genre that has been discarded in favour of gaming's march to try and get all the polygons and all the photorealistic details. Going FMV is an interesting choice, of course, albeit one that can hamstring the game a bit, but I must say I was a fan of the way that things were done. They go about doing this with a pretty simple setup, with the narrative being set mostly, if not entirely, within a single office. But the way it uses the plot device of being a therapist helps grease the wheels. I mean, it's a good plot device anyway, like you're given in this window into all these characters' lives, and so great plots can blossom out of mundane questions. Speaking of, the challenge of any FMV game is being able to marry the gameplay with the video. See, in most video games you have 3D models, and they can be animated, and you can make them interact with the player's input, whereas FMV, because it uses video clips, requires some method of linking the clips to the action of the player. Dr. Dekker uses a pretty interesting idea to try and open things up, where it allows the players to input their own questions, and having the characters via a video clip respond. Programming wise, this is a somewhat hard task to stick the landing on, and in my experience it sort of worked. See, essentially the way that the game will go about doing this is it will look for keywords or phrases in a question, and if it matches, the patient will respond in kind. But what this can essentially boil down to is that if you phrase things incorrectly or you misspell a word, you'll be met with a standard, "Oh, I don't know about that" kind of response from your patient. And keep in mind when I say the proper phrasing, I don't mean in terms of, having everything being grammatically correct. I mean specifically in terms of the program is looking for you using a certain phrase, so if you don't use that certain phrase, then that's probably just going to not help you propel the story forward. So, it can get a bit technical, for something that's supposed to be simulating talking to an actual person. This isn't too much of a hurdle for the game because they give you hints and they have a drop-down menu that you can select useful questions from, so it's not a real roadblock, but it's not exactly the most fun way to be playing the game. Even though, truth be told, I was bloody just clinging on for dear life with that hint system by the end of the game. So I will give an example that's pretty early on in the game, so it's not super spoilery, but if you want to go in completely blank slate clean, feel free to skip ahead a little bit. But it's revealed that a character that has blackouts usually has them shortly after dancing, and I spent a lot of time, kind of interrogating that, when do you dance? Where do you dance? Are there any people around you when you dance? All these kinds of questions that are establishing, the specific parameters by which dancing can lead to a blackout. And I kind of just got to a point where I was in a bit of a roadblock. I was just like, I don't know what else I have to ask. And I popped up a hint and it said, maybe you should ask, if she thinks the dancing causes blackouts. And firstly, it's kind of one of those things that I was like, that felt very implicit just already. But I think it, once again goes to show that not unlike a lot of other puzzle game scenarios, if you don't follow the specific line of logic that the designer has come up with, it can mean that you just kind of end up coming to roadblocks, not because you don't understand and not because you aren't, paying attention or whatever. It's just a case of you didn't follow this specific line of logic. I don't know. It kind of bugged me a bit. Basically, I think the idea of using player-inputted questions to drive this mostly interrogation-based narrative forward is really interesting. I think it's a really cool idea, but the simple fact of the matter is it's always going to have some kind of a friction. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it isn't a bad way to go about doing things, and it does open us up to this story. Because I really feel like, for all the little issues, I think the story is more than good enough to be propelling this thing forward. Even if you're just kind of continuously getting stuff off the drop-down list, even if it's, you know, a glorified visual novel, it's a fucking good one. So the premise, like, usually I do this at the start, but I thought I'd leave it at the end. The narrative exists entirely within the psychologist Dr. Dekker's office. You don't actually play as Dr. Dekker though, but you play as his replacement, as Dr. Dekker has been moided. And as such, you must take over his role, assist his former patients, and maybe even find the murderer. So one thing I want to get straight about the mystery part of this cosmic horror mystery, essentially, it's an interesting idea. Are you going to help the patients, or are you going to push them to get information to solve the murder? And that's kind of, in and of itself, an interesting little moral choice. I have been playing a lot of mystery games recently, and not a lot of them have been very good mysteries. They've just kind of been like, that's kind of the premise. Kind of also is true of Dr. Dekker. The murder is more like this really interesting hook. Like it's this thing that they can play at the start to be like, you know, you don't know who you are, but you know who this, you know, or you know the name, I should say, because like he is a bit enigmatic. You know of Dr. Dekker. I guess the best way to describe it is that the murder of Dr. Dekker serves somewhat well as the kind of frame narrative. So what I mean by that is, you know, if you're a fan of anthology kind of fiction like I am, one thing that you might find in those kinds of narratives is some kind of larger story that connects everything. You know, thinking about it now, the murder does serve that kind of purpose. Like, every suspect that you can go to, you'll inevitably at some point be asking them about, like, you know, did you hear he got murdered? Where were you, you know, at so-and-so time of death? You know, that kind of thing. And in that way, it sort of works. It definitely pales in comparison to the individual stories. And it might have been nicer if maybe there was just like a little bit more interconnectedness between the individual story. That the much more interesting stories lie in the patients themselves. It's such a cool way to be framing these individual narratives, to be doing them as like patients, because you're seeing the entire world through like the tiny little like peepholes of the character. You know, you're seeing everything through their filters and layered on top of, you know, whatever mental conditions they may be having. And this is kind of where you see the cosmic horror kind of part of it, is the patients are creating these fantastic, horrific visions of their own world, and each feels really engaging, and there's kind of a weird humanness, I guess, to all of them. You know, there's anxious people who are being tempted by immoral things to be doing when they have, you know, an extra hour in the day, and, you know, there's people who are lying and downplaying awful things that they have done, and you can't be certain if they're downplaying them because they've actually managed to kind of undo their transgressions, or if they're just so deluded that, you know, they're right, that's how they've kind of rationalized it to themselves. And I will definitely say, like, as far as I can be able to say it, because I don't exactly feel super qualified, the acting seems great, the writing seems great. I'll give some bonus points to Aislinn Diath, sorry if I mispronounced your names, but Aislinn Diath playing Mariana, and Bianca Beckles-Rose as Jaya. Like, fantastic acting on those two ladies' parts. Is this a game that you should pick up? For me, I think the question is whether you think a really good story can make for a really good game. Because the simple fact of the matter is that, I mean, I'm more than happy to have like games that are kind of low gameplay if the story is good and vice versa. Because in the case of Dr. Dekker, like, it's lacking a bit in the gameplay department. You know, I very much hope that this is kind of a stepping stone to even more fantastic FMV experiences. Like, there are other FMV experiences by this very studio that I'm interested in. And, you know, I very much hope that we get to see way more of these kinds of games, because, you know, having all kinds of different games is always a fantastic thing, you know, having more options available. The story, from everything, from the content to the way it's presented, makes for basically the gaming equivalent of a page turner. And in the grand scheme of things, I think that is more than enough. But while I'm out here, thank you guys, gals, and non-binary pals for listening to this very review. As I said at the start, like, I'm probably going to be just doing a bunch of reviews of games that are a bit older. Just because I have like a lot of schoolwork and it's kind of going to be coming to a head a bit these next couple of months. So I am sorry about that. The exception is that I'm going to try and still get a lot of content out when PAX rolls around. So look forward to that. So it'll be like a review, and then just like a dozen interviews or something. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you all, regardless, both new and old fans alike, for listening into this. If you enjoyed this, please like, please comment, please share, please subscribe. And if you would like to support not only the videos, but the podcasts and just everyone, please consider going to our Patreon. You can support us for like $1, and like that in and of itself is still, you know, very awesome. So I'm getting choked up. No, I'm just kidding. My throat's just getting sore for talking too long. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys. I mean, I guess I'll see you in like December, because as I said, I'm going to be like posting a bunch of reviews. I don't know. We'll see. I'll see you when I post the interviews. I don't know. I'll see you when I dream. Bye. The fuck ending was that?